After the shock ending of the third season of The Walking Dead, we saw the surviving members of Woodbury join the Atlanta group at the prison, forging an entirely new group of survivors. It was during this 7-month stay at the prison that our survivors experienced the pandemic arc, where an abnormally aggressive strain of the flu wreaked havoc on the newly established community. And it was during this outbreak that we saw Carol kill 2 members of the prison community, being Karen and David, in a desperate attempt to prevent the pathogen from spreading. That being said, I want to talk about whether or not she was right to do what she did, from both an ethical perspective and from a pandemic response perspective. And maybe then we can look at Carol's motives, as some people view her actions in this specific story arc to be out of character. With that said, in order for Carol's homicide of Karen and David to be rendered potentially permissible or justifiable, from the standpoint of ethics, one would have to prove that the termination of these individuals' lives was necessary for the preservation of the community as a whole, meaning that these deaths would have had to have been necessary to prevent the spread of the prison virus. Unfortunately for Carol, the flu had already infected multiple persons by the time she opted to murder these innocent individuals. The first victim of this mysterious illness was the pig named Violet, and not long after the pig's death, we see Patrick the Nerd succumb to the virus. Patrick then went on to reanimate and attack Block D, and in the process he got one hell of a kill streak. But Patrick wasn't the only infected individual, as Charlie also died as a direct result of this super flu. Considering that this sickness was airborne, and considering how compact and dense the living space was within the prison, it is an absolute certainty that many other people had contracted the prison flu by the time Carol chose to kill Karen and David, hence meaning that her termination of Karen and David was all for nothing, thus rendering it to be neither permissible nor justifiable. This was, in fact, a classic case of murder. It was certainly not lawful under the prison's social contract, nor was it a justifiable homicide. Even when we look at this issue from a pandemic response perspective, Carol's actions simply do not survive rudimentary scrutiny. Killing people as a means to stop the spread of a pathogen is just not necessary when said people can just be easily quarantined in their own cells. The prison could have used rags as makeshift masks as well in order to help slow down the spread of the virus. Masks make it harder for the pathogen to spread. Now this is and never has been a foolproof measure, just as bulletproof vests or seatbelts aren't a guarantee of safety from bullets or car crashes. But these measures are better than nothing, and it was certainly a method available to the prison community. They could have even instituted social distancing policies and practices to help mitigate the spread of this new pestilence. I cannot stress this enough when I say the letter is pretty cut and dry. Carol was wrong, and she certainly deserved to be exiled as a form of punishment. Be that as it may, I do believe Carol's actions to be well within her character. At the beginning of the 4th season, we see that Carol is teaching the kids of the prison to defend themselves. And she's doing this secretly until Carl catches her in the act. Now, the reason she is doing this is because she feels a great level of guilt for not being able to prevent the death of her own daughter, Sophia. Her maternal instinct is now to protect the children she has been tasked with babysitting. And she knows that these kids will have to learn how to defend themselves in this new world, because an adult may not always be there to rescue them, just as Rick wasn't able to protect Sophia. Then, out of nowhere, a new threat presents itself, an invisible enemy which threatens the very people she cares about, a threat which almost caused an entire cell block to fall. Considering the trauma of losing a child, it makes sense that Carol's decision to kill Karen and David, for the sake of the prison community, is more of a trauma response as opposed to a totally rational decision. You could also argue that she spent her entire life being unsafe and controlled by an abusive partner. At the prison, she probably felt safe and actually in control of her life, for the first time ever, and the novel prison flu posed a risk to that safety and control. Hence, she acted against this new threat. With all of that being considered, Carol was wrong, and this moral failing does come back to haunt her in later seasons. And you know what? I'd love to cover all of that in a future video on Carol. But for now, that concludes this specific essay about the best female character in the franchise. Anyways, if you like this sort of content, like, share, and subscribe. Also remember that you may opine anytime if you feel so inclined down in the comments section. I'm Captain Gold and hope to see you in my next Gold Standard video.